Blue Book is one of the most controversial military projects in US history, from unexplained sightings to highly questionable cover-ups. Today we're going to dive into the real story behind Project Blue Book and the government's quest to unravel the UFO phenomenon, and then cover it all up. Project Blue Book was an official investigation conducted by the United States Air Force from March of 1952 to December of 1969. It stemmed from similar projects, Sign and Project Grudge, but when Air Force generals leading those projects started getting fed up with how poorly UFO investigations were going, they wanted something more serious, and so Project Blue Book was born. Its main goal was to look into and analyze reports of unidentified flying objects to see if they posed any real threat to national security. This project came about during a time when UFO sightings were starting to become a lot more frequent, and people were genuinely scared at the time. I think today most people find the idea of spotting genuine UFOs and aliens kind of exciting, but the concept of aliens was relatively new at the time, or newer, and fear seemed to be the general vibe. Just look at all the alien invasion movies like War of the Worlds coming out at the time. The USAF decided to take a systematic approach to studying these sightings, attempting to separate reports that could be chalked up to natural phenomena from the cases that had no solid explanation. Project Blue Book collected over 12,000 reports of UFO sightings during its operation. The team working on it included scientists, military personnel, and other experts. By the time the project ended, most of the cases were explained, but a small percentage did remain unidentified. Cases that Project Blue Book investigated and their findings are cited in discussions about government secrecy when it comes to UFOs to this day. Project Blue Book had a very specific classification system, which was used to organize and analyze the thousands of UFO reports that the US Air Force was receiving. The system was important to help make sense of the data and determine which cases deserved some deeper investigation. The sightings were categorized into three main groups: identified, insufficient information, and unidentified. The identified category is pretty self-explanatory. These were sightings that could be easily explained. They usually turned out to be misidentified aircraft, weather balloons, other natural phenomena like lightning. The insufficient information category included cases where there wasn't enough data to make a solid judgment. Reports like this were sometimes incomplete or just lacking in detail, making it tough for them to draw any solid conclusions. And then you have the exciting category: unidentified. These were for cases that couldn't be explained. They made up a small percentage of the total reports, but that's not really surprising. People didn't know as much about what went on up in the sky then, and with the UFO craze at its peak, people were making a lot of reports that we'd probably never bother making today. Project Blue Book was first headed by United States Air Force officer Edward James Ruppelt. If Project Blue Book was a TV show, this first season was the best. Ruppelt seemed to have a genuine interest in actually uncovering the truth behind these UFO reports. Ruppelt was an experienced airman and had served in World War II. He was also responsible for coining the term unidentified flying object. Before that, they were just known as flying saucers. He'd made a lot of changes to how UFO reports were handled. He set out to reduce the stigma that often came with reporting a UFO, creating a standard questionnaire for UFO witnesses. This would also help gather data that could be analyzed statistically. Ruppelt took his job very seriously and expected the same from his team. He avoided speculation and made sure his staff didn't lean too heavily towards any single theory about UFOs. If anyone was too skeptical or too convinced, they were off the project. He also went to scientists for advice, issued regular press releases, and kept the military up to date with monthly reports. Some of the biggest cases during Ruppelt's time included the Lubbock Lights and a 1952 radar visual sighting over Washington, D.C. The scientific consultant for Blue Book was an astronomer named J. Allen Hynek. He'd been skeptical about the project at first, but he started to become more open to the idea of UFOs as he encountered more and more reports. More on him later. Ruppelt left Project Blue Book in February of 1953 for a temporary reassignment. When he returned, though, he found his team had been cut down significantly. He ended up losing faith in the project and left. His time with Project Blue Book is remembered as the last serious attempt by the Air Force to genuinely analyze UFO phenomena. 1953 is where things really started to go downhill, and a lot of that is thanks to the Robertson panel. UFO sightings were on the rise, especially around Washington, D.C., so this led to a lot of attention and concern. So the CIA decided to set up a panel of scientists to look into it. This group, called the Robertson Panel, was led by H.P. Robertson, a physicist from the California Institute of Technology. The panel included physicists, meteorologists, engineers, and one astronomer, J. Allen Hynek. The Robertson panel first met on January 14th of 1953. They wanted to figure out how to handle the growing public interest in UFOs. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, Hynek, and others presented the best evidence they'd gathered. After 12 hours of reviewing 6 years worth of data, the panel concluded that most UFO sightings had simple explanations, and all could be explained with more investigation, which they didn't think was worth the effort. The panel believed that these unverifiable UFO reports were just clogging things up, risking the chance of missing a real threat to the United States. So they recommended that the Air Force downplay the importance of UFOs and start a full-on debunking campaign. They suggested using mass media, even getting Disney involved, and enlisting celebrities to treat the subject like a joke in order to make the whole subject seem less serious and interesting to the public. Then in December of '53, a regulation was put in place, making it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized people. So this panel right here really shaped how UFOs and alien reports would be dealt with in the years to come. In March of 1954, Captain Charles Hardin took over Project Blue Book, and he basically treated his whole time there as a lunch break. He had very little interest in UFOs and was pretty hands-off. The previous head of the project, Edward James Ruppelt, really wasn't a fan of this guy, writing that Hardin, quote, thinks that anyone who is even interested in UFOs is crazy. They bore him. During this time, the number of reports deemed unidentified had dropped to less than 1%. During the Ruppelt era, this category made up about 20 to 25% of all reports. The debunking campaign was clearly in full effect here. Captain Hardin was mostly just disinterested in the whole thing, but Captain Gregory, who came next, he was even worse, in that he was actively setting out to downplay and discredit pretty much every UFO report he came across. Captain George T. Gregory took over Project Blue Book in 1956. They now wanted as few unidentified reports as possible, so they changed how they classified these sightings. Gregory's approach to this was pretty straightforward. He reclassified many of the UFO sightings to make them fit with more conventional explanations. For example, if a sighting was labeled as a possible comet, it was bumped up to a probable comet. And if a sighting had been previously labeled as a probable comet, well, that just became a definite 100% misidentified comet. This same method applied to other sightings, like balloons. If someone reported seeing a strange balloon-like object, Blue Book would just call it a balloon without doing much, if any, research. This tactic became standard practice into the later years of Blue Book. This wasn't cool. Even the scientific consultant for Blue Book, J. Allen Hynek, who I mentioned before, a guy that had been such a hard skeptic at first, even he thought this was wrong. Everything was looking pretty bleak. It seemed like Project Blue Book had jumped the shark. Ratings were down, the show was on the verge of being cancelled. But then a new star of the show came along. Lieutenant Colonel Robert J. Friend took over Project Blue Book in 1958. Unlike Gregory, Friend tried to change things up and steer Blue Book back toward serious UFO investigations, but he faced a lot of challenges. There was a serious lack of funding and support. The higher-ups still wanted these things to be downplayed. But Hynek saw Friend as a breath of fresh air and rallied behind him. He organized a meeting in 1959 between Blue Book staff and personnel from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, or the ATIC. Or do people say ATIC? I imagine They say attic, but who knows? You tell me. Hynek figured it was time to reevaluate some older UFO reports, but these plans didn't go very far. During Friend's time, there were talks about moving Blue Book to another Air Force agency, but no one else wanted to take it on. In 1960, the US Congress held hearings about UFOs. The civilian UFO research group NICAP accused Blue Book of covering up UFO evidence and gained some allies in Congress. Because of this, Blue Book was investigated by Congress and the CIA, with folks saying they hadn't been doing what they were supposed to be doing, genuine scientific studies. Some more personnel were added, and Blue Book's budget was increased. Things looked like they were on the up and up, but it seemed like it had all been for show. By the time Friend left Blue Book in 1963, he'd become very disillusioned with the project. He figured it had become ineffective and should be dissolved. He tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it didn't even matter. He couldn't turn Project Blue Book into what it was in the glory days of Edward Ruppelt. After that, Major Hector Quintanilla took over and ran the whole project straight into the ground, fully embracing the debunking campaign that had been plaguing the project for years. Now, of course, there are endless conspiracies surrounding Project Blue Book and the project's handling of UFO cases, especially for the post-Ruppelt era, where the leaders seemed to be less open to the possibility of UFOs on the surface. Were they genuinely dismissive, or were they hiding things? A lot of people who are into UFOs, or just skeptical folks in general, think that Project Blue Book dismissed credible UFO reports without proper investigation, and that they were trying to debunk rather than seriously study the possibility of UFO phenomena and aliens. When Project Blue Book ended in 1969, the Air Force made several statements about their findings over the years. They claimed that most UFO sightings could be explained by identifiable objects or natural phenomena. This included everything from weather balloons and aircraft to stars and clouds. They stated that these objects posed no threat to national security and that there was no evidence suggesting that any sightings were related to extraterrestrial beings or advanced technology beyond what was known at the time. Basically, their final report downplayed the possibility of UFOs being anything extraordinary. But as I said, not everyone was convinced, and there have been conspiracies ever since. So much of the discussions around government cover-ups when it comes to aliens and UFOs comes from Project Blue Book. Some former military personnel and insiders have come forward over the years, claiming that there were cases of more detailed investigations and findings that were never made public. But why did Project Blue Book, especially in the later years, seem to have this agenda of dismissing the idea of extraterrestrials and downplaying credible reports? Well, aside from that whole clogging up the pipes thing that I mentioned earlier, most people will say it was to avoid panic in the public. Maybe the government thought and still think that we're just not ready to hear that there really are little green alien folk flying around our planet. Maybe the government is actually working with them, and to avoid public outrage, they're keeping it quiet. But there's another possibility that's a lot more depressing, so why don't we finish off with that? Some argue that Project Blue Book and projects similar to it that have followed in its footsteps are really just smokescreens designed to give the appearance of transparency while actually diverting our attention away from darker government activity. This is the thing none of us really want to believe. It's a lot less fun, but it is possible. As for what they could be hiding, you name it. Everything from testing of dangerous weapons to more conspiratorial stuff like weather control. There are all kinds of possibilities, and none of them are all that pleasant. But I like to think that there are aliens visiting Earth, that we're on the verge of an exciting new chapter in history. Hey, one can dream, right? Portals to alternate dimensions, time travel, mind-altering experiments. These might just sound like science fiction tropes, but there have been government projects that have explored all of these things and more. These are secret government projects that hint at parallel realities. The Large Hadron Collider, or the LHC, is one of the most impressive scientific machines ever built, designed by the European Organization for Nuclear Research to smash particles together at near light speeds, because why not? But for all its scientific greatness, there are a lot of conspiracies surrounding it. That the LHC can create black holes or open portals to other dimensions. People have even talked about the possibility of the thing accidentally ripping a hole in our reality and letting something from another universe slip through. One of the more popular conspiracy theories is that CERN, or CERN, is trying to open a gateway to another dimension. The idea is that by colliding particles at such high speeds, they could create a rift in space-time, allowing access to parallel universes. There's also a theory that CERN is trying to contact alien beings or gods from these other dimensions, and that the machine's true purpose is far more sinister than just smashing atoms, which is already pretty nuts as it is. Now, none of these theories have any real scientific backing. The scientists at CERN have repeatedly told the public that the LHC is safe and that it can't create black holes or tear open the fabric of the universe. But to be fair to the conspiracy theorists out there, I mean, they would say that, wouldn't they? Who's gonna come out and tell the public, like, yep, oh yeah, we've been just trying to open a gateway to another dimension and make contact with entities in other realms. Don't mind us. Keep giving us your tax dollars, please. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP, operated from 2007 to 2012. It was a top-secret government unit tasked with investigating UFOs. Now, a few years back, a series of AATIP documents were declassified. Apparently, they had also been looking into invisibility, cloaking, anti-gravity technology, wormholes, and even extra dimensions. Nick Pope, who used to head up the British government's UFO research, got his hands on some of the documents related to AATIP. The exact nature of their work is still a bit of a mystery, but what's clear is that they were looking into some really strange technology. Serious research was being done on things that could potentially bend the laws of physics as we know them. What's even more interesting is the connection to UFOs. The Pentagon confirmed that AATIP investigated footage of Navy pilots encountering a strange glowing object near San Diego. The object rotated and had a mysterious aura around it, and no one's been able to explain what it was. Now, when the AATIP claimed that they looked at UFOs as less of a possible alien threat and more of a foreign threat, that other countries could be developing technology far ahead of the US. UFO does just mean unidentified flying object after all, but Nick Pope thinks that maybe AATIP may have known more than what they were letting on, and that the talk about foreign advanced aerospace threats was just a cover. If they really were delving into things like wormholes and extra dimensions, could they have been trying to figure out how UFOs move the way they do by bending space and time? Were they exploring technologies that could open doorways to parallel realities? The Avro Canada VZ9 Avro car was a real project that almost sounds too crazy to be true, an attempt to build a real flying saucer. Back in the 50s, during the height of the Cold War, the US military was trying to find new ways to get the upper hand, and that included experimenting with some pretty wild ideas. The Avro car, which was developed by Canadian aircraft manufacturing company Avro Canada, was one of those ideas. It was supposed to be a vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, aircraft that looked just like the UFOs seen in countless B movies at the time. The idea was that this flying saucer could hover like a helicopter, but fly like a plane. It didn't work out. The Avro car had all sorts of problems, mainly with stability and speed. When they tested it, the thing could barely get off the ground, and when it did, it was wobbly and hard to control. By 1961, the project was scrapped. But maybe that's not where the story ends. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the Avro car was just the public face of a much deeper, secretive project, and that the military continued working on flying saucer technology in secret. Some think that the US military may have actually succeeded in creating an advanced flying saucer. Project Mannequin is said to be a secret program run by the British and US government, focusing on creating super soldiers. According to the theory, Project Mannequin involved serious experiments on human subjects, trying to enhance physical and mental abilities using advanced technology, even tapping into other dimensions. The idea behind this project is that the government was, or possibly still is, trying to create soldiers who could do what no normal person can: enhance strength, telepathy, and even the ability to manipulate time and space. And how is this achieved? Well, through alien technology recovered from UFOs. Now, some whistleblowers, and yes, there are actually people who have come out claiming to have been part of this project, well, they say that Project Mannequin was involved in experiments with time travel and parallel universes. The claim is that by understanding how different dimensions work, the government could train soldiers to move between these realities, giving them a huge tactical advantage. After World War II, the US government secretly brought over more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to work on American projects. The thing is, many of these scientists had worked for the Third Reich, and some were even members of that party. This isn't a conspiracy, this actually was a thing. The US was in such a rush to get ahead of the Soviet Union in the Cold War that they didn't care. They thought these scientists were going to give them the edge in all sorts of scientific fields, mainly when it came to rocket technology. One of the most famous scientists brought over was Wernher von Braun, who had been heavily involved in the Third Reich's rocket program and later played a major role in the US space program. But was there more to Operation Paperclip than your more conventional scientific pursuits? There have always been rumors that these scientists were also involved in more controversial research, like work in mind control, psychological warfare, and possibly even experiments related to alternate dimensions and parallel realities. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, was and is very controversial to this day. Officially, HAARP was a research program in Alaska designed to study the ionosphere. It used a huge array of antennas to send high-frequency radio waves into the ionosphere. Scientists hoped this research could help improve communication systems, navigation, and weather prediction, but there were a lot of people who were highly skeptical about this. HAARP became a target for tons of conspiracy theories, mainly that it was a secret government project designed to control the weather, cause earthquakes, or even manipulate people's minds. Others took it a step further even, suggesting that HAARP was being used to open portals to other dimensions or parallel realities. The idea behind these theories is that by bombarding the ionosphere with radio waves, HAARP could somehow tear open the fabric of space-time or create wormholes that connect our world to alternate realities. Some theorists believe that HAARP was trying to tap into these other dimensions for military reasons, maybe to gain access to advanced technology or even to communicate with beings from other realities. I mean, if you're dipping into other realities and tearing into them, why not talk to the people there? You'd probably have a lot of questions to answer for them. The Montauk Project, a supposedly top secret government program that may or may not have been part of the inspiration for Stranger Things. It's said that this project took place at Camp Hero, an old Air Force base in Montauk, New York. After the success of the Philadelphia experiment, which allegedly involved making a naval ship invisible and accidentally teleporting it, the US government decided that they were going to try to push the boundaries even further. The Montauk Project worked in advanced psychological warfare techniques, mind control experiments, and the creation of a time portal, supposedly. The project supposedly involved abducting young people and using them in these experiments with the goal of harnessing psychic abilities for the military. Some stories even go that the project managed to open portals to other dimensions, allowing beings from alternate realities to enter into ours. According to some conspiracy theorists, these experiments were so dangerous that they eventually had to be shut down, with the base's records and evidence erased or buried deep in classified government files. Project Looking Glass is a conspiracy theory that the government developed technology capable of seeing into the future and even observing events in parallel realities. Supposedly, the project was part of a bigger effort by the government to understand and possibly manipulate time and reality itself. The technology, often described as a device or machine, allowed users to peer into different timelines or dimensions, giving them glimpses of potential futures or alternate versions of reality. And by observing these different realities, the government could predict events before they happened and influence the course of history. They're kind of like Paul Atreides and Dune. Some versions of the theory claim that the device could even allow people to travel between these alternate realities. Imagine being able to see how different decisions would play out across different timelines, or accessing advanced technology from a parallel universe. I mean, why wouldn't you do it? Project Pegasus. This is a lesser known but highly intriguing conspiracy theory which involves time travel and teleportation experiments supposedly conducted by the US government in the 60s and 70s. Now, according to those who believe in the project, it was part of a secret program under DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, aimed at developing technology for time travel and interdimensional exploration. A lawyer named Andrew Basiago from Vancouver, Washington, claims to have been a participant in these experiments when he was little. He stated that the government had successfully developed time travel technology using a device based on the work of Nikola Tesla. This device was known as a chronovisor, supposedly allowing participants to travel back and forth in time and even visit alternate realities. He said he was sent on multiple missions, including a trip to witness the Gettysburg Address and a visit to the future to gather information for the government. He also said a young Barack Obama joined him on some of his adventures. The Stargate Project. Now, unlike some of the projects I've talked about on this list that are more conspiratorial and may or may not have actually existed, Project Stargate really did. It's more of a question as to whether or not anything actually came of it. The US government ran this program from 1977 to 1995, and the purpose behind it? To explore the potential of psychic phenomena for military and intelligence purposes. Yeah, the Montauk Project's not really sounding all that crazy now, is it? Stargate was specifically interested in what was referred to as remote viewing, the ability to see or describe places, people, or events without actually being physically present there. The CIA, along with other military and intelligence agencies, funded and ran these experiments, often working with people who claimed to have psychic abilities. They figured that if they could train people to accurately see distant locations or predict events, it could be a powerful tool for espionage and warfare, which, I mean, it certainly would be. In 1995, though, the project was terminated, at least officially. The story is that Project Stargate was ineffective, not reliable enough for practical use, but some believe the government actually continued the research in secret. After all, if even a fraction of the remote viewing claims were accurate, it would be a game changer for military operations. Do those in charge truly care about our well-being? Can we ever truly trust them? While getting too conspiratorial has its own set of problems, I think it's also important to remember not to be too trusting. As this list shows, government cover-ups have been known to happen, and these are all fairly recent. Today, we're talking about some of the creepiest government cover-ups in recent history. And we're starting off the list with Project Sunshine. Such a pleasant sounding name for such an eerie project. That juxtaposition just makes the whole thing even creepier. I like to call this the Frankenstein experiment because this study involved grave robbing. So it was carried out in secret by the government, which is insane. Starting in 1953, the United States Atomic Energy Commission carried out a series of studies on the effects of radioactive fallout. But in order to look at the effects of radioactive material on the human body, now thankfully they did not decide to snatch up a bunch of living people, but they did end up using a bunch of non-living samples. The problem was the families of the dead were never told about this, and of course never consented. In 1955, the commissioner of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, Dr. Willard Libby, spoke about the need for human remains to be used in studies on radiation, and was quoted saying, "I don't know how to get them, but I do say that it is a matter of prime importance to get them, and particularly in the young age group. So human samples are often of prime importance, and if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country." Yikes. Next on the list, Tuskegee Syphilis Study. So this was a long-running study beginning in 1932 all the way up until 1972. And considering what was going on here, It's pretty sickening it went on as long as it did. So this study focused on the effects of untreated syphilis in black men. Initially, it involved around 600 men. 400 of these guys had syphilis and 200 didn't. All of them were misled about the study's true purpose though. They were told that they were receiving free healthcare and burial insurance in exchange for their participation in the study, but the 400 men with syphilis weren't told they had it. The term bad blood was used to describe their condition, which was a local term that was just kind of vague, not referring to any specific condition. And these 400 men were given placebos just to maintain the guise of actually being treated in the study. And if this isn't all infuriating enough, even when an actual cure for syphilis became available in the form of penicillin in the 40s, the researchers intentionally withheld the treatment from the participants. So many of these guys suffered severe health problems, heart disease, blindness, and death. By the end of this quote-unquote study, which went on for 40 years, 28 patients died directly from syphilis, 100 died from complications. But that wasn't the only unethical study the US government carried out involving syphilis. There was also the Guatemala syphilis experiments, and this one may be even more shocking, if you can even believe that. So these experiments were carried out in Guatemala between 1946 and 48. It was to study the effects of syphilis, gonorrhea, and cankeroids, and testing the effectiveness of penicillin as a treatment. So there were about 1,300 Guatemalans involved in these experiments. Included in this group were prisoners, mental health patients, and even orphans. And no, the participants were not informed about the true nature of these experiments. Many were deliberately infected with syphilis without their knowledge or consent. In some cases, the researchers exposed participants to syphilis by allowing them to have contact with an infected individual. You can imagine what that contact was. In other instances, they directly inoculated participants with bacteria. Once they were infected, they would attempt to treat the subjects with penicillin, but not all participants were treated. By 1953, 83 of these unwitting participants died. Next up, we have the horrors carried out in Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. It was active from 1937 to 1945. There were brutal human experiments carried out on a large scale. 200,000 to 300,000 people died as a result of these experiments. I mean, even calling what went on here experimentation is a stretch. This was basically just pure torment. Unit 731's goal was to develop biological and chemical weapons, and they were testing the effects of various pathogens and toxins on the human body. So they tested this stuff mostly on Chinese prisoners of war. Inhumane, but not all that surprising. What is more surprising though is that even civilians were used as fodder. These experiments involved exposing people to deadly diseases like the bubonic plague and anthrax. Victims were also dissected while awake. There were frostbite studies where victims were forced to stand out in the freezing cold until they got frostbite. It was just complete and utter madness. And what went on here didn't become known until after World War II. And here's another super messed up thing. In exchange for their research data, a lot of the researchers of Unit 731 were pardoned for their war crimes by the United States as part of a secret deal. Ever have that feeling like Big Brother is watching you? Well, with the internet, I think people are more paranoid about this than ever, but Operation Chaos has become one of the most infamous cases of government overreach when it comes to surveillance. So this was a covert program carried out by the CIA to monitor and gather intelligence on domestic descendant groups who were opposed to the Vietnam War. This was not a popular war, and the US government was concerned that there were foreign influences fueling the anti-war movement at the time. The CIA set out to collect information on anti-war activists, student groups, and anyone else really that they believed might have had connections to foreign governments or were influenced by communist ideology. The CIA conducted surveillance, they gathered intelligence, and they compiled dossiers on thousands of US citizens. They were secretly monitoring people's activities, collecting information on their personal lives. Undercover agents would also infiltrate anti-war groups to gather info from within the organizations they were monitoring. Now, whatever your political views are, this whole thing was clearly a violation of people's privacy. Very un-American, at least in the rose-tinted glasses ideal of what America was supposed to be. Now, there's a lot of United States on this list, but Canada, we're not innocent either. There's been some incredibly dark stuff that's gone on here, mostly relating to the Indigenous population. Residential schools in Canada were institutions Aboriginals were forced into with the aim of assimilating them, ridding them of their own culture, their language, and traditions into a more Western way of life. Now, you might think these schools were just a thing of the past, but the last one closed in 1996. They began operating in 1831, forcibly separating families. The Canadian government, in partnership with various religious groups, primarily the Catholic Church, established and operated these places. And most of what was going on here was unknown to the public, downplayed, or just not discussed. And the silence and lack of transparency really allowed for incredibly harmful practices to go on for a very long time. It's something that hasn't even been fully remedied to this day. Next on the list are the Terrordrome experiments. Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia became notorious for experiments carried out by a complete mad scientist named Dr. Albert Kligman, who had a total lack of regard for human life. Dr. Albert Kligman was a dermatologist who carried out a range of very dangerous scientific tests on the inmates living in what became known as the Terrordrome, thanks to this doctor. Now, in the case of these studies, the inmates, in a sense, volunteered for these experiments, but it wasn't out of a genuine willingness to participate. Many of them were in desperate situations and saw the experiments as a way to earn some, small amounts of money. They were then subjected to a variety of experiments that can only be categorized as inhumane. He exposed them to microwave radiation, infected them with skin diseases, and conducted biochemical experiments on them, including exposing them to dioxin, which is a toxic substance that was used in Agent Orange. And when I say Kligman had a complete lack of care about these men's lives, I mean he literally saw them as inhuman. He famously said that all he saw when he entered the prison grounds for the first time was, quote, acres of skin, like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time, end quote. All the guy saw was raw material. It's pretty disturbing. Now we move on over to Sweden with the Vipeholm experiments. This study happened in Sweden from 1947 to about 1949. The purpose of it was to study the effects of sugar on teeth, but their way of going about it was completely unethical. In Vipeholm Hospital in Lund, Sweden, mentally disabled patients were used as the subjects for the study. They were given excessive amounts of sugary foods like candy, chocolate, and toffees to observe the impact it would have on their teeth. Were vulnerable people. They weren't able to give proper informed consent here. They were used as subjects in a study without having a clear understanding of the risks involved. And yeah, surprise, surprise, but a lot of the participants' teeth became severely damaged. And the results of the tests weren't even made public till years and years later because the confectionery industry was helping sponsor it, and they weren't too pleased with the results. So they tried to just subdue the whole thing. So what happened to these poor people was kept a secret for decades. Next up, we have toxic waste in Area 51. So we don't know exactly what was going on here because it's Area 51. But there were employees who came out in the 90s saying they'd suffered because of some of the practices going on at the base. A number of Area 51 workers actually took the facility to court when they started developing all kinds of illnesses after exposure to hazardous material. The government had dumped a whole bunch of discarded hazardous waste into trenches the length of apparently football fields, and then would set them on fire. So there was just this toxic smoke that would fill the air, which became known as London fog by the workers. After long exposure to this stuff, many staff began developing serious illnesses later on in life, like horrible skin rashes, which they referred to as fish scales. They were like kind of hard membranes that would form in the arms, the hands, the legs, and their feet, and sometimes they would just use sandpaper to remove it. And many would also develop cancer and other respiratory illnesses. And because the workers weren't allowed to disclose anything about what was going on at the base, they had a very difficult time receiving proper medical care. But the big question is here, like, what was in that toxic waste? And finally, we have the infamous MK Ultra. This sounds like something from a conspiracy thriller, if that's even a real genre. I think you know what I mean though. But this was really a thing that happened. MK Ultra was a secretive program carried out by the CIA in the 50s and 60s. And the goal was to explore mind control techniques and methods of altering human behavior. But a whole long list of messed up experiments were used. There was a big focus on illicit substances, mainly LSD, to study their potential for mind control and use in interrogations. Basically, they were trying to find substances that could manipulate a person's thoughts, emotions, and actions. They'd also employ psychological torment, like sensory deprivation and isolation. Some subjects were even the victims of SA. Most of these test subjects had no idea what they were actually in for. Some didn't even know they were part of experiments at all. This was being done all on the hush-hush. It wasn't until 1975 that the whole thing was finally exposed to the public. The majority of the files on MKUltra had been destroyed in 1973 though, so sworn testimonies from participants were pretty much all the prosecution had to rely on. Just so you know, the government is staging an alien invasion to screw over the working class in favor of a new world order.
And it's called Project Bluebeam. The manipulation of the public leading to a one world order might be coming sooner than we think, and it might already be in the works, in the form of a top secret elite global manipulation plan called Project Bluebeam. The theory was brought forth in 1994 when Serge Monast claimed that NASA and the UN had been working on a 4-stage project that would turn the world completely on its head and result in the elite class becoming the overall ruling class of the entire globe. How? Fearmongering. In order to carry out Project Bluebeam, the world leaders will utilize holograms to fake cataclysmic events such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, alien invasions, and even the rapture, all while projecting religious symbols into the sky. This would destroy the public's faith in science, leading us to turn elsewhere for answers and guidance, which, of course, is when the elites would step in.
Talk a little bit more about this guy behind Project Bluebeam. It's a man named Serge Monast, or was, because he's dead now, but Serge Monast was a Canadian journalist born in 1945. He wrote several books and articles claiming that powerful global elites were plotting to establish a new world order by using advanced technology and psychological manipulation. In the mid-90s, Monast began getting some attention for his Project Bluebeam theory. He claimed that NASA and the United Nations were behind a plot to create a false second coming of Christ and other religious figures using holograms and mind control. More on that later. Now, according to Monast, this was meant to trick people into accepting a single world government and abandoning their traditional religions. He thought this was going to happen several different times throughout history. It hasn't yet. Monast also believed that the government was already testing some of these mind control techniques and technologies on the public. He died in 1996 at the age of 51 of a heart attack, but his supporters think his death was suspicious, possibly linked to his work in exposing Project Bluebeam. I mean, how was this 51-year-old man who looked like he was 70 not a pinnacle of health?
If you are watching this on a computer, tablet, phone, or TV, I've got some bad news. You're probably being brainwashed right now. That's right, not only is Project Bluebeam using holograms to instill fear into and influence the public, they are also using subliminal messaging, interrupting television broadcasts and other forms of consumable entertainment in the hopes that eventually they will be able to cause the masses to hallucinate the second coming of Christ. If Jesus is standing in your living room right now, you might want to take a break from electronics for a while. If not, listen up. Confusion and fascination over the impending end of the world is exactly what the elites want, because it makes it easier for them to unite the world under a single leader, one that they have chosen to govern in such a way that it suits only their own best interests. I'd say keep your guard up, but if you're already stressing about the end of days, I fear it might be too late.
So a lot of what this conspiracy revolves around is this rise of a new world order centered around a single religion that spreads across the globe, then indoctrinating everyone and usurping current religions, mainly Christianity and Islam. The concept is that this is going to happen in steps. So step 1 is said to involve faking earthquakes in different parts of the world to create fake archaeological discoveries that'll be churned up in the rubble. These discoveries will then be used to challenge and undermine religious beliefs, discrediting religions by presenting so-called new evidence that supposedly contradicts their teachings. So there's just a lot about this that makes zero sense. First of all, how are you gonna fake huge natural disasters without having, victims? You'd have to have people living in a full-on matrix simulation in order for that to work. Plus, religious beliefs are deeply ingrained and they're not easily swayed by new evidence alone. New archaeological evidence, that's being discovered all the time, and half the population just doesn't care and goes on believing what they want to anyway. Theological beliefs are not based solely on observable facts. They're based on faith. That's kind of the whole point. So the idea that archaeological findings, even if faked, just could usurp the very foundations of established religion overnight, that's just, I don't know, that's insanity.
Is it though? Because in February of 2023, the United States military took down 4 mystery objects flying in the skies above the US and Canada. While one of the objects was identified as a Chinese spy balloon, the other 3 remain a mystery. Of course, the natural response of the public was to claim that the objects were alien spacecrafts, which I'm starting to believe is exactly what the government wanted. Why else would they make such a show out of the whole thing, but only release one statement saying that the object taken out was a reasonable threat to civilian flight? The whole thing just seems too vague to be real, which points to the objects being a hologram and the retrieval of the objects being a hoax. What is starting to seem more and more real the more we discuss it, though, is Project Bluebeam.
Alright, step 2 of the rise of the New World Order involves the coolest light show you're ever gonna see. I mean, just get ready. May as well just cancel your trip to Disney World. Here there will be a massive holographic space show, or various light shows across the globe using advanced technology to project 3D holograms depicting whatever the most popular god is in the region. So some of us will see Jesus, others would see Muhammad. These projections will also be made to speak various languages, of course. Gotta make sure everyone understands the message. At the climax of this incredible light show, the holographic figures of these different gods will supposedly then merge into one, representing the Antichrist, a figure opposed to the traditional religious beliefs and the one true God that the evil New World Order is trying to control us all with. I'm not really sure how this is supposed to work on the blind. Well, I guess we'll just have to take everyone's word for it.
If Project Bluebeam really does exist, which it probably does, is Bob Lazar in on it? You guys remember Bob Lazar, right? The guy who supposedly risked his life to reveal the secrets of Area 51 to the world. Secrets like at one time there were 4 legitimate alien spacecrafts residing on the base that ran on element 115, aka Moscobium. Well, now I'm starting to wonder if the government threatened to kill him over his statement, or if they paid him to say it in the first place. I mean, what better way to get the public to believe in aliens than have it come from someone they trust, someone speaking out against the government. I mean, after Snowden, whistleblowers practically became one of the most publicly trusted news sources out there, but now I'm not so sure, because if the government really is trying to instill fear into the eyes of the public through brainwashing them into believing an alien invasion is going to wipe out the earth, what better way to do it than with a guy like Bob Lazar? Because I kind of believed Bob Lazar, but now I'm thinking, was that a mistake?
Alright, on to step 3 of the New World Order rollout plan: control through telepathy, or at least that's what you'll be made to believe. So step 3 involves making people believe their god is speaking directly to them through telepathy. The idea is to use extreme low frequency radio waves to project these thoughts into each person's mind individually, making them think they're hearing divine messages, which will obviously be done to keep people in line, following the will of the rulers of the New World. Not sure how this is supposed to work on the deck, Steph. I have a lot of other questions as well, though. How is each and every person gonna receive the attention they deserve, through these low-frequency commands? I mean, you gotta have to be pretty specific with them if you really want people to believe that it's God who's talking to them. A one-size-fits-all approach, I don't think that's gonna work here. So this small 1% of elites is gonna somehow find the time to send these specific messages to all their underlings down below. Even if they had access to everyone's names and jobs and stuff, like how are they gonna bring up all this personal stuff about you that only a god would know?
Are aliens a cover-up for Project Bluebeam, or is Project Bluebeam a cover-up for aliens? This is the dilemma that I'm currently facing, and I'm sure many of you are too, because if the government can fake an alien invasion to cover up a plan to take over the world, why can't they also spread one world propaganda to cover up the fact that aliens exist? Like, it's entirely possible that the reason for this whole blue beam discourse is so we get off the backs of the government so that they can go about their unethical and environmentally detrimental alien experimentations in peace. I mean, maybe they're already working with the aliens so that the elites don't create a one world order here, but so that they can head off to another planet once they destroyed this one, leaving us all to crash and burn. I'm just saying, if you don't see me in the next video, assume I got it right.
And of course, the whole thing ends with the rapture, the final takeover of a single world power. Step 4 of Project Bluebeam is the most outlandish part of the whole plan. It involves making people believe that an alien invasion is happening. The government's been creating and testing UFOs for this very reason, mind you. Next, everyone will be convinced that the rapture is starting, and finally, using some mix of electronic and supernatural forces, microchips will be activated in all consumer electronics and appliances, which have been, of course, pre-planted. After this, chaos will erupt and people will be scared and desperate enough to finally accept a new world order. After this, according to Monist, everyone will sign their souls away to Lucifer and officially enter the new world order. Those still clinging to their former religions will then be kept as slaves. It's really not that hard to see what this dude is trying to accomplish with this conspiracy theory. Yeah, it's a lot of
Project Serpo, a secret government exchange program with extraterrestrial beings.
Did astronauts visit a distant planet and interact with alien beings? And are they still in cahoots with the government to this day?
A top secret exchange program between the United States government and planet Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system, aka the planet of the short grays. The project was allegedly created under the administration of President John F. Kennedy after the US government saved the life of an alien, EVA-1, who crash landed on Earth back in 1947. Entirely grateful and forever indebted to humanity, the alien began working with the US government and teaching them about his home planet, Serpo. When EVA-1 died, he left behind communications technology, which the government then used to eventually get into contact with other Serpo natives. That is when the government made arrangements to send 12 specially trained astronauts to planet Serpo so that they may learn about life outside of our atmosphere. In order to reach Serpo, the 12 astronauts had to travel through a wormhole, after which the majority of them got sick and one unfortunately died of an aneurysm. But of course they kept going and eventually they reached the alien planet. For a decade they studied life on Serpo before returning home and assuming entirely new identities in order to protect the security of the mission. Fair enough, I suppose.
So what are the origins of this Project Serpo tale? Well, like with most conspiracies in the modern age, it started gaining popularity online and took off from there. It all started in 2005 when a series of anonymous emails began circulating among UFO researchers and enthusiasts. These emails, which were allegedly from a retired US government official who remained anonymous, laid out this insane story about an extraterrestrial exchange program. We'll talk more about this anonymous individual later. The Project Serpo story started making the rounds way faster than these types of stories would have back in the day. It was 2005, the internet was still relatively new in the grand scheme of things anyway, and the UFO community was just hungry for new sensational stories. And this one, it's pretty much the definition of sensational.
Remember that alien that I mentioned, EVA-1, that crash landed to Earth Earth in 1947? Yeah, well, that was actually the Roswell incident of 1947, and also the first time the US government supposedly made contact with aliens. As many of you are probably already aware, in 1947 an unidentified object crash-landed on some farmland in Roswell, New Mexico. When Area 51 was alerted of the incident, they rushed to the scene, collected the object, and released a statement saying that what had come spiraling down to Earth a few nights prior was nothing more than a weather balloon. But then they sent the object out to another base for testing, and another, and another. Why? Well, because it wasn't actually a weather balloon. It was an alien spacecraft containing 6 aliens, 5 of which had died in the crash, and 1 of which came to be known as Extraterrestrial Biological Entity Number 1, or EBA-1. EBA-1 was taken to the Air Force facility in Los Alamos, where he stayed until his death in 1952. During this time, he learned to communicate with the military and told them some pretty interesting things.
Now, if the US government is really working with these alien beings, where might they be carrying out their activities? Area 51? Some hidden base in Antarctica? Well, some say they could be operating from an even more top secret place. Dulce Base. Dulce Base supposedly sits deep beneath the Colorado-New Mexico border, close to Dulce, New Mexico. Dulce Base is said to be a secret facility where humans and aliens are working together, exchanging ideas and doing all sorts of experiments, multiple levels deep underground with high-tech labs. The rumors are that different alien species, from the Greys, from planet Serpo possibly, to the reptilians, are working hand in hand with the US government. As to what they're trying to accomplish, probably something really fun and good that we don't really need to bother worrying about. Stories about this place really started coming about from a man named Paul Benowitz, who claimed to have discovered an underground base near Dulce, full of gray aliens and humans. His claims caught a lot of attention, but Benowitz's mental health eventually declined, and he ended up in a mental hospital, passed away in 2003. And there's always been this rumor that he was part of a big, widespread misinformation campaign.
As I said, during EBA-1's time on Earth, he informed the US government of quite a few things. One being that Serpo natives, Ebans as they are referred to by humans, had actually been visiting Earth for the last 2,000 years with no issue. But unfortunately, this time new Earth radar technology that they don't have on Serpo caused the ship to go haywire and crash, killing the majority of the crew. In 1949, a similar thing happened. 6 Ebans crash landed, but this time unfortunately none of them made it. When the ship was examined, the military found a communications device, which they worked on with EBA-1 to repair. They got it working and sent out multiple distress signals, but it wasn't until after EBA-1's death in 1952 that they finally got a reply. Communications began between the US military and the Ebans. It took a while, but eventually they were able to understand one another. After learning about the 12 deceased Ebans stranded on Earth, the Ebans asked if they could come to Earth and retrieve the bodies. Of course, the military wanted something in return, so they came up with the exchange program. The military wanted tech, but the Ebans said, no, you're not ready for our tech. And so they proposed something else. In exchange for the bodies of their deceased, 12 astronauts could spend a decade on planet Serpo. Furthermore, an Eban would stay on Earth to assist the military. In 1964, the Ebans landed on Earth once again to retrieve the bodies, and Project Serpo, aka Project Crystal Knight, as it has also been called, commenced.
The star system where these aliens are supposedly from has been at the center of some of the most famous alien abduction stories in history, including the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Were these beings from Serpo, Ebans, or Greys, as they're typically called, responsible for abductions like this? The Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty interesting. In September of 1961, this American couple was driving through rural New Hampshire at night when they noticed strange lights in the sky that seemed to be tracking their car's movements. Barney decided to stop the car to get out and have a look, and what he allegedly saw were humanoid figures peering out from a hovering craft. The Hills peeled off as fast as they could, but they later realized they'd lost a pretty hefty chunk of time that they just didn't remember. But as the days passed, they started to remember things. They ended up reporting being taken aboard a UFO where they were subjected to medical examinations by beings described as small, with gray skin, oversized eyes, and tiny little anime mouths, that's the exact way they described it back then. It's a 60s term, anime mouths. Their account was one of the earliest descriptions of the now iconic image of your classic gray alien.
Of course, a regular mission to space is no walk in the park, but a mission to a faraway planet located in a star system entirely separate from our own, that's tough. And apparently so was the training process. It took an entire year of survival, escape, evasions, weapons, and psychological training for the 12 astronauts to become fully prepared for their mission. The crew consisted of scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. Over the course of a year, along with the standard training, one by one, each member of the crew was buried in a 6 by 5 foot box and kept there for 5 days as part of a training intensive. There was no light, no communication. Just a small air hole that allowed the astronauts to receive food and water and not suffocate to death. It was tough, but they all passed, and the pilots even went on to learn how to operate alien spacecrafts. When it came time to take off, the 12 astronauts, along with 40 tons of gear, which included 10 motorcycles and 3 jeeps, were loaded into the spacecraft using anti-gravity technology, and one even came along to assist in their journey. When the ship was all boarded, each astronaut went to their own individual pod and settled in for the long journey ahead.
All right, before we get to what they saw on that journey, let's have a little bit of fun here and talk about something that comes up more than you'd probably think when Project Serpo or just interactions between aliens and humans is discussed. Hybrids. Yeah, aliens creating human-alien hybrids, either through experimentation or, God forbid, actually getting it on. This kind of thing always feels like it's going down the same rabbit hole that creepy online fan fiction does, where it's like, I'm gonna write about my fantasy of Alf impregnating Willie Tanner. I don't know. I'm not trying to shame, live your lives, but the concept of humans and aliens breeding with each other always feels inherently silly to me. With that said though, this does often play into the Project Serpo conspiracy. Those astronauts were apparently on this planet for a while. Who knows who they met? One thing could have led to another. Plus, in all these reported UFO abduction cases, who knows what kind of nasty experiments those Greys could have been doing.
When the crew arrived at Serpo, the first thing they noticed was that it was barren, bright, and hot. Really hot. About 107 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Quickly, they realized why. Planet Serpo had 2 suns, which are shown here in a photograph taken by one of the astronauts, allegedly. One of the suns was orbited by Serpo, and the other was off in the distance. Because of this, the planet never got dark, and the days were 40 hours long, meaning that their decade-long mission was actually going to take 13 human years. In total, there are about 650,000 Ebens living on the planet in small, separate village communities and houses made of some kind of concrete rubber substance. It was a primitive life, but at the same time, the Ebens were equipped with electricity and incredibly advanced technology. Families generally consisted of a male and female Eben, and each family was allowed to have a maximum of 2 children, which were hidden away until they reached the age of maturity. During their time on Serpo, the astronauts gathered as much information about the Ebens as they could. And if you guys remember, I do believe I mentioned that one of the astronauts died on transit. Apparently the Ebens used that astronaut to clone and create hybrids of, like James mentioned. And it was then that the remaining astronauts realized that they weren't as peaceful as they once thought them to be. When it came time to return home, for some reason, 2 of the astronauts actually decided to stay, and then 2 more astronauts died on the way back to Earth. The surviving astronauts were given a large sum of money and an entirely new identity. That's great and all, but many of them were suffering from radiation poisoning due to the 2 suns and died soon after their return to Earth.
One of the most avid supporters of the Project Serpo conspiracy is a man named Richard Doughty, who we can't really talk about Serpo without talking about this guy. See, Richard Doughty has made some pretty outlandish claims, so outlandish that there's a whole other conspiracy that spawned around him and other government officials like him. Supposedly, Doughty was the man behind those anonymous emails I talked about earlier. Richard Doughty is a retired special agent who used to work for AFOSI, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. But a lot of people think he wasn't actually investigating UFOs, but that he was part of a team spreading misinformation intentionally, basically muddying the waters and leaking supposedly secret info about the government's exchange program with alien beings in order to confuse the public, making it hard for us to tell what's real or not. Of course, the purpose behind the misinformation is, of course, to distract everyone from the actual nefarious things the government is up to. I mean, who doesn't get excited about aliens, right? I'm sure we'd all rather believe that the worst thing the government is doing is working with extraterrestrials instead of them doing some shady stuff at our own expense. Could there be some genuine truth about the planet Serpo thing? I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, just something to keep in mind with stuff like that. Honestly, what doesn't the Blue Planet Project cover?
We're talking short grays, tall whites, crossbreeding, hybrids, and advanced intergalactic technologies and pharmaceuticals. Take it away, James.
So, what is the Blue Planet Project? Well, the Blue Planet Project is a global movement dealing with the Earth's water crisis, but who cares about that? We're talking about another Blue Planet Project, a top secret document leaked by a supposed whistleblower from the US government, leaking info about decades of cooperation between the US military and alien forces right here on Earth. The document was never meant to be seen by the public, but in 1991, an anonymous author released it. It was filled with sketches, notes, diagrams about different alien species and their advanced technology. Then in 2014, more supposed secret information was released in a book entitled Blue Planet Project: An Inquiry into Alien Life Forms. This one contained lost chapters and was full of info that had been left out of the original release. Info we'll be diving into in more detail, but in general it contains stuff that's been leaked by a number of whistleblowers. There's actually more than one author. Their names are now known: Jefferson Souza and Gil Carlson, and apparently the bigwigs have not been happy. Ever since these books came out, there are 3 in total now, the United States government, NASA, and all those aliens working with them who thought they were being all sneaky have been absolutely pissed. The monkey wrench has been thrown, secrets have been leaked, and now me and Hannah are here to kick them while they're down, and we're gonna mess up the global elite's plans even further with the help of all you fine subscribers. So let's get ready to rumble.
According to Blue Planet Project documents, there are 4 specific extraterrestrial races. Some you might have heard of before, and some you might have not. To ease us in, let's start with the most commonly known alien races: the Zeta Reticulans and the Reptilians. The first documented race are the Zeta Reticulans, aka the Greys. The Greys are your kind of stereotypical looking aliens, said to be humanoid beings with gray skin, large heads, and almond-shaped black eyes. They have slender bodies with elongated arms, legs, fingers, and toes, and their height ranges from 3 to 4 feet. The species is incredibly technologically advanced. They possess telepathic abilities and are often associated with abductions and genetic experimentations due to their scientific interest in humanity. Next described are the Reptilians, humanoid beings with scaly skin, slitted eyes, and sometimes even tails. According to reports, these guys are often aggressive and manipulative. Not only that, but apparently many of them have already infiltrated society. I'm talking the government. That's right, the president is a lizard.
One of the subjects that's come up in the Blue Planet Project conspiracy is the existence of alien pharmaceuticals. Now that does not sound very good. These are exactly what they sound like: highly advanced medications or substances that extraterrestrial beings possess, far superior to anything developed here on Earth, capable of treating diseases, enhancing physical abilities, or even altering consciousness. And that's where things get gnarly, because sure, we'd love to have quick cures to horrible illnesses, but I don't want to be swallowing pills covered in the grease stains by a race of reptilians. I want to control my dang brain on top of that, but that could be exactly what's going on. Aliens and the government working in unity to create highly addictive medications that keep us dumb, dependent, and delirious. But they may also be working on developing medications for humans that could help us endure long space flights, just like our space-faring pals. I don't want to come off too negative here, in case they're watching from their secret labs deep beneath the Denver airport.
Okay, now that we've covered Greys and Reptilians and gotten a little more information about the project from James, thank you James, let's talk about the remaining alien races discovered to date. We have the Nordics, the Mantis beings, and the Indistincts. Starting with the Nordics, or as you may know them, tall whites, which are tall, humanoid beings with fair or pale skin, light blonde hair, and blue or green eyes, along with an idealized muscular physique. The Nordics are benevolent and spiritually advanced, with a goal to push humanity towards enlightenment and peace. And then there are the mantis beings. Insectoid, mantis-like creatures with long, slender bodies equipped with a human head and torso, large, compound insect eyes, and sectioned little insect limbs. Like the Nordics, mantis beings are considered spiritual beings with access to higher dimensional realms than our own. According to the documents laid out by the Blue Planet Project, there are also other variations of the four species, likely due to cross-coital interactions between them, as well as completely separate, indistinguishable alien beings with appearances and motives that humans are just not yet able to conceptualize. So don't even bother thinking about it, because you can't. Your brain won't. You don't have that ability.
MAGI, the Majority Agency for Joint Intelligence, is a powerful government organization that controls a number of secretive projects, all detailed in the Blue Planet Project books. The projects are called Sigma, Sigma being the project which first made contact with aliens and continues to do so to this day. Plato, which is responsible for diplomatic relations with aliens. The US government apparently agreed to keep their presence secret in exchange for their technology. They also agreed to allow them to abduct humans and animals for experiments. The Aquarius Project was responsible for compiling the history of aliens on Earth and their interactions with humans, which apparently goes back thousands and thousands of years. The list just goes on and on, with multiple secret government projects all under this MJ-12 umbrella, all with specific jobs and tasks centered around dealing with the presence of aliens on Earth.
Remember how I mentioned the Zeta Reticulan scientific curiosity and how they are pretty much responsible for 99.9% of all abduction cases that we talk about on Earth? Well, let's dive a little deeper down that rabbit hole and talk about what exactly that process looks like according to documents connected to the Blue Planet Project. The abduction part itself is pretty murky, as most people who experience alien abductions often have lapses in their memory, the most common lapse taking place between the abduction and the release portion of the experience. What is generally remembered, however, are the lights, generally strange bright lights in the sky, and the sounds, generally pulsating low-pitch vibrational ones. And then of course there are the experiments. Human experiments performed by the Zetas. These include physical exams, reproductive exams that include the extraction of genetic material, and neurological tests, which generally involve brain scans and probing. Those who have gone through the process and lived generally experience trauma, PTSD, and memory loss, which, in case you forgot, I already mentioned.
Alright, so we got greys, reptilians, disgusting mantis people, and gorgeous Nordic aliens, apparently that the US government has been aware of and even working with for decades. But what does this all mean for us? Well, there's all kinds of directions or things like this can go, but we can essentially boil it down to two: bad and good. If you're a glass half full kind of person, you might see some benefit to aliens and humans working together. In fact, I might even actually have more faith in extraterrestrials setting out to help humanity than our own governments. Take those supposed alien pharmaceuticals, for example. I mean, they could revolutionize medicine. On the flip side, they might just be revolutionizing the government's ability to control us. Then there's the alien tech. The book talks about advanced spacecraft and alien propulsion systems. If we learned to use this technology, space travel would become as common as flying on planes. We might even be able to explore other planets and possibly find new places to live. But on the other hand, there's the potential for some pretty dark implications.
I've got an implication for you. The implication that one day we will all become hybrid, crossbred versions of the aliens I described just a few points ago. Probably the Zetas, aka the Greys. Remember how I said that generally experiments will include reproductive examination with a biological material extraction component? Well, if you're wondering what they could possibly be using that material for, wonder no more. Zeta Reticuli is the name, hybridizing and crossbreeding is the game. Apparently, and according to the Blue Planet Project, Zetas have been using human DNA to create gray human hybrids for quite some time now, and many people who have been abducted claim to have actually encountered these human-alien hybrids while aboard the Zeta spacecrafts. It is theorized that the practice is one of advancement and self-preservation. Simply put, the Greys engage in crossbreeding to ensure the longevity of their civilization and, I don't know, maybe make themselves a little bit taller. They max out at 4 feet. But if they wanted to try crossbreeding with a human, they could have just put out an ad on Craigslist. I'm sure there's like 100 guys who would gladly jump at the chance to jump on a gray. They really don't need to be doing all that.
Of course, this conspiracy ties into a whole bunch of conspiracies dealing with aliens, including, of course, the fact that the government could be covering them up. Area 51, Bob Lazar, Dulce Base, cases of UFOs being spotted by mass amounts of people, only for the cases to mysteriously go cold. Many conspiracy theorists and even just the general public who's not even super into this sort of thing can probably agree that the government keeps a lot of things under wraps. And what bigger secret could there be than the presence of alien life right here on Earth? Why this book ain't all over the news, plastered on every street corner, being talked about on every podcast seeking the truth is beyond me. I can understand not being super surprised about grays in cahoots with the government. I mean, they're boring, but mantis beings? Everyone needs to be made aware of this immediately, which is why we're here with you right now.
I mean, it makes sense why the government is doing their absolute best to cover up the existence of multiple alien races making their way across the universe. How else would they be able to secretly reap the benefits of the advanced extraterrestrial technology? I know you touched upon it briefly, but let's get into it a little bit more. I'm talking specifically about the technologies used in alien spacecraft. You guys might recall a video James and I did a while back talking about the one and only Bob Lazar, who James also just mentioned, who claimed that the government was using Area 51 to reverse engineer a spacecraft that ran on moscovium, a highly unstable and radioactive element that has only ever been produced in a lab, on Earth at least. Well, according to the Blue Planet Project, that guy was telling the truth. The documents also claim that the military has used alien technology to create anti-gravity devices and to unlock the secrets of faster-than-light space travel. Not only that, but aliens have also provided us with exotic matter reactors and metal materials that can be trained to shapeshift in various environments. Imagine going to sleep one day and your laptop's a laptop and you wake up and it's like, I don't know, a statue of a bear or something?